I know myself as a custom chemical manufacturer, I'm an expert in blending chemicals. Whereas Trace, as the owner of a water treatment company, you're an expert in water treatment. I think the pandemic has forced both of us as business owners to become experts in HR. I know that I have a lot of questions. My employees have a lot of questions. And I'm sure everyone watching this video has a lot of questions. So now that we're being asked more HR questions that are pressing more than ever, the question is, how do we get these questions answered? How do we make sure that they're answered in a timely manner and in an accurate manner? So we're fortunate enough to have Helene Grossman from HRTG Atlanta with us today. And Helene is going to answer what we found were some of our own questions, some of what we felt were the most common questions. And then Helene is going to let us know what she thinks that we need to know pertaining to HR right now.
Hi, everyone, and thanks again to Trace and Jill for inviting me to talk with you today. Again, I am Helene Grossman. I am president of HRTG Atlanta. We are an HR consulting company that helps businesses like yours deal with HR questions and challenges that you may be facing. Today, Trace and Jill have asked me to provide some best practices concerning some pressing HR questions that you are probably facing right now. So these are the 3 questions and best practices that I will be covering. The first one is, as we come up into the fall season, is it flu sick or is it COVID sick? And how do I deal with that in the office? We have employees coming back to the office after being remote. What are some of the best practices for that? As well as how do we accommodate or help employees with school-age children and the remote learning aspect? So before we get started on all of that, I just want to review the 5 steps of an employee who tests positive for COVID-19 in your workplace. The reason I'm doing this is this will obviously impact as people are either coming back to the workplace, as we talk about COVID or flu. So I just want to remind you of the 5 steps around employee testing positive. Number 1, obviously send the employee home. Number 2, make sure that you're cleaning and vacating any working area that employee may have been in. Number 3, it is your obligation to notify potentially exposed employees. Those would be anyone who is within 6 feet of that person for more than 15 minutes. A big one is determining when the employee returns, and it's not by testing negative alone. These are CDC guidelines. So if an employee has tested positive and there's no symptoms, you can end that isolation 10 days after testing positive. If it's moderate to mild symptoms, you can end the isolation after 10 days if at least 24 hours have passed without a fever and other symptoms have been improved. And then obviously if it is severe symptoms, the employee needs to continue isolation for the full 14 days or longer. You may need to record if the infection is work-related and report it to OSHA. I mention that because obviously that needs to be done in the state of California if you are a business in California. However, there may be other states that also have that requirement. So I just wanted to make sure that you look into those state regulations as well. So the big question for the fall is, the flu looks like COVID in many aspects. What do we do and how do we handle that in the workplace? So the first thing I'll tell you as a best practice is to have a team meeting and be totally transparent. It is hard to tell the difference. Both of them have similar symptoms. We all know that. So let's just put that up front in terms of a flu sick or a COVID sick. There are some differences, but you're not a doctor. So what you're going to do as a team, obviously, is talk about what the plan is going to be. And you and your team should develop a plan. And this is an example of a plan. A plan would be to tell your entire team that no one should come to the office that is experiencing any of those symptoms, and that is just to be on the safe side. I would recommend that they talk with their own doctor about whether or not they should be taking a flu shot this year. I would treat each situation as if the employee has COVID. If they get tested and it comes back negative, then just make sure they're sitting out for 24 hours free of symptoms before they come back into the office. Obviously, you do not want an employee to bring the flu into the workplace and infect anyone else. If it is COVID and they are out, then in terms of paying them, you have the Family First Response Care Act, which is 2 weeks of sick leave that will be paid. If it is the flu, just like normally anyone being sick, then you need to look at your PTO, your sick days, and your unpaid leave plan. Okay? That is a best practice. It's really getting together and determining what the plan is going to be. But I would tell you the big one here is treat it as if it were COVID. The second best practice that we're going to talk about is bringing employees back to the office after being remote. One of the best practices here is that you can't come up with all the items that you need to cover by yourself. And so one of the best practices is really to create a task force of various individuals, mainly from different departments if possible, or different levels, to help with designing the back to office plan. And again, a plan, okay? That plan should be communicated and forthcoming before employees return back to work. And the plan should include these couple of items at a minimum. The safety procedures. Are we wearing masks? Where's the sanitizer? How are we going to be cleaning the office? Are we doing temperature checks? The next question, how will they return? Is it by choice? Are we going to be phasing in? Are we going to have some people working Monday, Wednesday, Friday? Are we going to have some people working Tuesday and Thursday? If you say that you're high risk, can we just let you work at home? Are the business hours the same? Is the layout of the office different? Are we going to have space in between the desks? And then again, you need to reinforce what the expectations will be if you're coming to the office or whether you're working from home. And then finally, check in as often as possible, okay? And find out, how is it working in the office? What changes do we need to make? Put this back on your task force. You know, once they come up with a plan, the plan should be the task force is checking in after people get back to the office. But again, the big thing here, the big takeaway is create a plan and make sure you're over communicating that plan. The third area is what we call accommodating and helping employees with school-age children with their remote learning. And I will tell you that for the most part, you've got to be flexible. You just have to be flexible. This is just such a difficult time for many. And so I tell you as a business owner to look at your schedules, look at your start times, look at your end times. Can people come in later? Maybe they can work, starting from 11 o'clock, later because they need to be with their kids in the morning. If there's ways that you can be flexible and still get the work done and work with the employees, then definitely explore that possibility. I'm going to tell you that a lot of businesses are being creative. They're working with compressed work weeks. Some of them are giving daycare stipends, if they can afford it, to those employees with school-age children. Some are working from home, working from the office. They're adjusting their days. They're being flexible. But again, as long as they are communicating and it is working for you in the short term, again, I tell you, be flexible. And then the last thing I'll tell you is be consistent. Don't pick and choose. Employees with children have different situations, and even though it may be very individualized, we also need to be consistent in how we treat them. So if you're allowing employees with children, some to stay home or to work, then you should allow all employees with children to be able to do that as well. And then remember, the Family First Response CARES Act, again, is still in effect till December the 31st. And this act for 12 weeks allows an employee to stay at home with their child if they cannot work in the office and cannot work at home. This is 2/3 of their pay for those 12 weeks. Some of them may have used that up back in the March or April timeframe. So again, you'll just need to keep track of all of that. We are going through a very difficult time. And I know that it is very trying on everyone. But I will leave you with this quote, which I love, from Maya Angelou. And that is, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you make them feel. And I will tell you that this rings especially true in the workplace. So remember that as you're dealing with your employees. Everyone is going through a very stressful time. So please remember, take care of yourself and take care of your employees and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Jill, you got it right. We've got to do so much more as company owners. We have to know so much about HR. So I'm so glad Helene was able to come on and share some of the valuable information with us and the people watching this webinar. The next topic we're going to talk about is, how do we move on from this? What's the long-term plan? We've got so many questions about what's the new normal. Nobody knows what that is. And then if they think something's normal today, well, watch out, because it's going to change tomorrow. So this is our section where we're going to talk about what ifs.
This pandemic has really brought up the question, as Trace said, what if? There's a whole lot of what ifs. Myself and some of my supplier colleagues and friends that I've spoken to, they've mentioned, sales channels are changing. So for me, what if nobody's able to call on me in person anymore? For some of my other suppliers and colleagues, what if they're not able to call on people in person anymore? What if the people that they're calling on don't want to see them in person anymore? It's a whole new virtual world out there. And while there is definitely some limitations and you don't get that personal contact, which I don't think will ever go away, I think people are always hungry for that. But at least for right now, I think everyone has or should be taking full advantage of the virtual world. I think sometimes, even though you can't get that personal contact, you may be able to get more information in front of somebody through a virtual presentation. What if we don't have in-person conferences anymore? Well, as AWT members, we're finding that out right now. I think everybody was disappointed that the live event for this year got canceled, and that we're having the virtual event. But I think now that we are in the midst of the virtual event and looking forward to it, is that this is very positive. It's something we've never done before, which allows us, I think, almost more creativity in a way, and a whole new different way of doing things. I kind of think, from my perspective, that I'm able to get more information out in front of people. It might be to maybe a smaller audience, hopefully not, but I do believe that the content can be different. And I think in some regards, it can even be better. So I think there's definitely positive aspects for that. I also think, going back to the what if we can't see people, it's not just calling on customers or suppliers calling on us. I think it is really the lack of in-person meetings and dialogue. I think that this time more than ever, it's more important to reach out and not become isolating. I think small business owners especially can feel that. I think it's important to have a trusted network of people. I think it's important to have good advisors, people to ask advice to. I know that I'm fortunate to have that with my legal team and my CPA and my financial team, but also with the Rising Tide Mastermind with my colleagues, with my AWT colleagues. I think what I'm lacking right now in seeing people in person, I'm more than making up for virtually, but I think you need to be open with that. You need to be able to change with that and take advantage of that. I've also found that traditional methods of marketing that we've done in the past have really needed to change during this pandemic. So I've been spending a great deal of time kind of figuring out, how do I network and how do I market? And I think that I have not only succeeded, I think that we have really reached my goals in terms of, or surpassed my goals in terms of, how do we market? How do we network? How do we stay in contact? What new things can we try? Not everything works, but I've been pleasantly surprised that most things that we've tried have worked better than I've anticipated. Trace, what have you found your what ifs are during this time?
Well, I will definitely say the what ifs grow with each and every passing day. I think the biggest what if people ask in our company and other water treaters is, what if we can't get back to normal with how we sell our water treatment wares? And I know we've had a webinar on selling during a pandemic with the Rising Tide Mastermind. I know I learned a lot about that, but what I want to convey to people that are watching this webinar is, we might be doing things differently, but the foundation of how we did those things doesn't need to change. Now, maybe somebody's not going to see you in person, but they can see you over Zoom. And as I mentioned earlier, you have somebody's undivided attention normally on Zoom. So if you've got a very well planned out agenda, so you're very cognizant of their time, you're not wasting their time, you make sure that you ask them, what do they feel they're going to get out of this meeting, or how will this meeting be most productive to them, to make sure you can adjust the meeting to hit their needs. I think you'll be surprised of what you can get done virtually. There are a lot of people out there that just say, well, if I can't do it the way I'm used to, I can't do it at all. And folks, if that's your attitude, you are not going to survive this, because as Jill mentioned, there's going to be some form of this even after all of this finishes. People are very heightenedly aware, and we're eventually going to change. So if you haven't changed, now is the best time. Reminds me of a Chinese proverb: the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. The second best time is today. So go ahead and plant your tree with some of the new things that you can do, taking care of the virtual community. I also have to think, trainings. I go to several trainings to get certification credit for several of the certifications that I hold. How are we going to do that now that we're not going in person? Well, I'm sure you've seen that people are doing virtual trainings, and those are getting a lot better. So again, thinking about what we can't do in COVID, now thinking about what we can do, just like your fees with this conference, you are able to probably send more people because you're not having to pay for their travel. You're not having to pay for their lodging. So don't always look for the negative things that are there. There are some positive things. And I will be the first to admit that there is a lot taken away when you can't get face to face in front of somebody. But if you can't, you can't. Don't focus on that. Focus on the things that you can do and see how you can do that to the best, or at least better than anybody else. And then when you're talking to your customers, they're really going to appreciate that.
Thank you, Trace. We've both done a lot of work with long-term planning and goal setting, and I know that you have a lot of expertise in that area. Could you talk to us a little bit about goal setting and long-term planning, and what are your thoughts on how it works during the pandemic?
Yeah, great question. Well, first off, long-term planning, I feel, is key to any business. I feel it's key to any family. If you're gonna drive somewhere, you want to know where that destination is. Otherwise, you don't know what route to take. Well, life is the same way. With the company, I always recommend that people mentally go 3 years into the future and see, what do we want to accomplish in those 3 years. So we're actually sitting 3 years into the future. Who are the people that are around us? What equipment do we need? What facility are we in? What are the different positions that people are holding in the company? All of those things. And you've got your trusted leadership team there with you. So you're now able to all see that image together. And then you think, well, how am I ever going to get this 3-year image to come to a reality? Well, the answer is one day at a time. And what I like to then ask people to do is to go back to 1 year planning. So you know what 3 years looks like. So what's a 1/3 slice of that long-term plan? And that's your annual planning. You're thinking, what do I have to do that's going to get us 1/3 to that 3-year plan? And then cut it down even further into quarters. These are the bite-sized pieces that we can do during the quarter so we can accomplish these goals. So we call these 90-day rocks in the mastermind group. And that comes from one Stephen Covey's 7-Habit book. And then they also use that in one of the books we read called 12-Week Year, which is one of, I think, the best planning books ever written, because everybody tells you how to plan, but very few tell you how to execute. 12-Week Year does a great job of doing both. Now, when we get together as a company after that 90 days, we know what the 3 year is supposed to look like. We know what that year is supposed to look like. And we know what we should have accomplished over the last 90 days. Now we have the benefit of life happening to our plan. So how well did we do with all of the things that happened to us during that 90 days? And what did we learn from that 90 days? And now we can readjust over the next 90 days and get it even better. Every time we go through this process as a company, we learn something new. We get better at it. So that's how I've always done long-term planning. It allows us to have a vision of where we're going. It allows us to use the past to learn how we're going to get better as we're going forward. In fact, if you listen to Scaling Up H2O podcast, it was episode 92. It's actually where I share the story of how we do long-term planning here at the company. And the podcast is about me preparing for my TED Talk. But you can hear how we actually do that here at the company on episode 92. And I actually refer to Back to the Future when we do long-term planning. So we get into our DeLorean, we go 3 years into the future. So if that interests you, you can listen to episode 92. But your question, Jill, is how does that change now that we have a pandemic, now that we have COVID around? And my short answer is I don't think it does. I think we all know where we need to go. But now, just like we were loading the car and we were going to Disney World, well, we've got a road closed. And it doesn't mean we can't get to Disney World, but it means we can't take the road that we were going to take. We now have to take a detour. Doesn't mean we can't get there. We just have to figure out how we're going to do that. So within all the things we've learned in the last couple of months, we actually know how to navigate this pandemic so much better than when it first started. Using that knowledge, we can now apply that to see which road we are going to take to hit that. Now, that being said, some of our goals might have to be adjusted a little bit just because we're not able to do them in the same way. So an example that I have of that is a lot of times we all have revenue goals. I mean, who doesn't, right? We all want to put more money on the top line. Well, now that we're not able to sell the way we're used to, and we're learning new ways to sell, having that same revenue goal might not be realistic this quarter. Maybe it will be more realistic next quarter. So change the goal a little bit, and you think to yourself, what am I able to do that will impact that goal, although it's not really going to complete that goal this year? And the example that I can come up with that we did is we didn't reflect on dollar revenue, we reflect on company touches. So how many times did one of us from our company reach out and touch another member of our clients' companies? And we were able to do that very easily over Zoom. We got compliments for that. I shared on part 1 that we got business from that. And that is leading towards that ultimate metric that we had of putting money on the top line.
Thank you, Trace. I have to echo, like you said, the 12-week yearbook that we read in the mastermind. I've taken full advantage of that this year. I believe that the pandemic, I believe that goals are important during the pandemic now more than ever. They just have to be adjusted. Maybe you're not looking at the same metrics. Maybe those have had to be adjusted. But I find that my goals are important. I find that I have kept them. I've revised them. I've actually crushed them this year. which I'm happy to say. But I have also noticed that it takes a lot more time. This year, I have worked harder than ever in the business just because of all the adjustments that need to be made. In my personal life, I have goals, and some of those goals, because we're not able to do certain things or go certain places, those are put on hold. But in my personal life, I have really found that I am struggling to maintain a work-life balance because of all of the extra time that I've been putting in at work to keep us safe, keep us stocked up, keep us up to date on the newest information, change our goals, just kind of changing with the times and with the information that I'm given, and making sure that, anytime anything that's uncertain, that I'm getting the best information and making the best decisions going forward. I think going into our next topic, that it is really more important than ever to maintain or try to maintain a good work-life balance, but also to kind of avoid burnout, to take care of ourselves now more than ever, because this is such a stressful and uncertain time. And if you're not careful, it can really take a toll on you. And we are very fortunate to have somebody with us today who Trace will introduce, that I think his message is very important and really a good way to close on.
I definitely agree, Jill. And before we move topics, thinking about personal goals, a lot of times, we kind of get depressed that we weren't able to meet those personal goals because of the circumstances that we have right now. I think when you really take account of all the things that you have that are going well in your life, you'll realize that it's not as bad as maybe you once thought it was. But let's face it, if you're watching the news, that's not the mindset that you're going to be in. That does not sell people turning on the news stations. So something that I have found that's been very helpful, I know we're using this on the Rising Tide Mastermind, is a book called The 5-Minute Journal. It's not really a book. It's called The 5-Minute Journal. And if it takes you 5 minutes to do it, that's probably a long time. But what it does, it asks you certain questions in the morning, and then it asks you certain questions at night. And it gets you thinking about all the things you really do have going for you. Jill, I know you and I have been using this book or this journal for quite a while. It does help you get in that positive mindset and see positive things instead of what the world kind of gravitates us to with all the negative things going around. So if you have not stopped by our booth, the Scaling Up H2O booth in the exhibit hall, we have a starter kit for the 5-Minute Journal. In fact, I even have a video showing you how to use it. So please stop by, watch the video, start doing the journal, and I promise it will help you with some of those areas. If you want to buy the journal, you can go to scalinguph2o.com/journal. That just takes you to an affiliate link straight to Amazon. If you want to go on Amazon and find it yourself, you can do that as well. But I just felt if I didn't share that with everybody, knowing how much that's helped us through this personally, and then also as business owners, I just would be leaving something on the table that somebody could use. But I think that does tee us up perfectly for our next speaker. Our next speaker has two main roles, and he's going to tell you about those roles. But he's going to talk to us about navigating the pandemic and making sure not only we get through it, but we stay positive as we do this. So our speaker is Alston Causey, so please welcome him.
Are you drinking enough water during this season? Now, I imagine that's probably not the first question you thought that I was going to ask, especially to a group like you guys, amazing water treatment professionals. However, it's an important question, and it's one that I hope that you will remember as you leave our time together today, is are you drinking enough water during this season? Now, my name is Alston Causey. I love the work that I get to do in a couple different roles. The two most important that I want to talk to you about today are my role as a travel agent, specifically the vice president of a travel agency based out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And the second, my role as a pastor. So let me start with the travel industry world, because I'm guessing, like a lot of you, your industries, our industry was wrecked during the past 6 months. During this COVID season, as you can imagine, the travel industry exploded, and not in a good way, right? Not only were all of our trips canceled, but we had to walk through that with every single client. Do they want to move? Did they have trip insurance? Did they not have trip insurance? Did they want to wait it out and see if they were going to get canceled? Which countries are shutting down? Which countries are open? It was chaos. And here's what I want to tell you. It's not over yet, but I do see a line on the horizon, and I think that we're starting to approach that line. And it's why I think this topic for today is so important, is are you drinking enough water during this season? You see, there's something that I noticed about 2 months in to the COVID-19 season, and that's this bottom line here, is that I think that the companies that respond best, and not just the companies, but the leaders, the companies and the leaders that respond best to this season will have a shot at becoming the best after this season is over. Let me say that again. The companies and the leaders that respond best to this season will end up having a shot at becoming the best companies and the best leaders out there after this season is over. And here's why I think that that is so important for me and for you. While I would never wish anything negative to happen to my competition, I don't believe in that. I do think that there will be opportunities to leverage, especially in our world, in the travel industry world, and probably in your world as well. Competition is thinning out. As agencies and as industries and as companies that weren't prepared for this COVID season or that aren't responding to it well are dying out, that's an opportunity for you and for your company to leverage. And I want to make sure that you do that incredibly well. Because here's what I know. And here's actually, it's a theory, but I think there's a lot of ground here. I think this is true. The end of the COVID season will actually be the starting line for the next season to come. And I think the next season is even more important. And here's what I want you to think about as you approach that starting line of the next season. I want you to think about it like a marathon. And I've run a couple marathons, and there's one thing that I will tell you is incredibly important as you prepare for the starting line day, for race day. It's that you come not only trained, but you come hydrated. You come with energy. You don't show up exhausted. You don't show up burnout, and you don't show up unprepared. That's a way to drop out of a marathon. And I don't want that for you. And that takes me back to our original question from the beginning of this talk is, are you drinking enough water during this season? And I know that question sounds obvious. You're like, oh, I see. You want me to be hydrated because the starting line's coming. Yes, that's true. But I want to unpack what I think being hydrated in this season as we look towards the starting line actually looks like. And I think that there are 3 things that I want to unpack with you. But before we go there, let me tell you about my second role. So like I said, I'm the vice president of this travel agency that's over here, but I also work full-time as a pastor at Gwinnett Church. And I love being a pastor, not only because I love Jesus and I love everything that he represents. And here's what I know. I know that for some of you, when you heard that I'm a pastor, that may have some negative connotations for you. And so if that's true, I apologize for whatever your bad church experience might have looked like. But here's why I think it's important to tell people about what following Jesus looks like. Because in life, I think that when you know Jesus, it not only makes you better at life, but it makes your life better. And I will unpack that for anyone who wants to talk about it at another time. But today, here's why I'm talking about that for you. It's because I don't just care about you, and I don't just care that you're at this summit today because of your role in the business world. I care about you as husbands, as wives, as parents, as grandparents, as spouses. Those roles are just as important as the roles that you play in your business community. And I think if you lose sight of your life holistically, you might be winning at business and completely failing with your relationships. And so that's why I want to unpack these 3 things that I think will help you stay hydrated, not just for your business life, although that will make it better, but these 3 things that'll help you stay hydrated holistically in your life in this season as you approach the starting line of the post-COVID season. So here's the first tip. Here's the first thing I want you to do to stay hydrated in this season. Tip number 1 is this. It's that you need to be filling up not only on work time, but filling up on your relationships, filling up on family time with those people that matter most to you. And here's why. I don't want you to sacrifice your family to succeed at business. Here's why. If you do that, you may win at business, you may have a lot of money, but countless people will tell you that isn't enough. And showing up at the finish line with a great business, or even showing up at that starting line with a great business, is not in the same realm as showing up prepared, but also with family and friends beside you. So don't sacrifice your relationships just to prioritize your work life. And here's something really practical because I know that pretty much sounds obvious. And a lot of the things I'm going to say today may sound obvious, but it's more important to remember them and to apply them than it is to hear them for the first time. And here's why I think that's true. It's because if you don't prioritize these relationships, if you don't prioritize that quality time, like I said, you're going to end up at the starting line of the post-COVID season alone. And I don't want that for you. So practically speaking, here's one really easy thing you can do. And this is something that I did personally because, like I said, my world has been chaos for the last 6 months. But as I thought about this idea of filling up on my relationship time, here's one simple thing that I did. And I'm going to specifically talk about my relationship with my wife. So I went to her and I said, hey, you know how crazy things are right now. I'm bringing her into my world. You know how crazy things are. You know that there are fires going left and right in the business world that we work in. But I want you to know that you are the most important part of my life. And I want you to help hold myself accountable, because if I don't, and if you don't help me with that, I will run 100 miles an hour towards the business community and forget about the things that are most important to me. So will you help me stay accountable to our relationship? Will you help me prioritize date nights? Will you help me prioritize our quality time together? That is one simple way that you can fill up on your relationship time during this season so that you can show up at the starting line of post-COVID hydrated on your relationships. Now, for tip 2, here's the second thing I want you to fill up on, is I want you to fill up on positive mental nutrition. And I know that sounds so weird, it sounds so ethereal, but here's what I mean by that. Is typically in our lives, when work gets really busy, we start to, crowd out the things that really help us grow and help us learn. And I call that positive mental nutrition. For you, that might be a really good book. It might be a documentary. It might be a podcast that you love to learn and grow in. It might even be conferences like this. So way to go on showing up. That shows that you prioritize things like this. Don't lose sight of that as you continue to fill up and hydrate on your positive mental nutrition. Because here's what we do, is we actually default to the things that are bad for us. We think, oh man, I'm exhausted. I just need to go binge watch a series on Netflix. That is a way to rest, but I'm telling you, it's not the same as hydrating on the things that are actually quality, positive mental nutrition. And so it's just one really practical step as you're walking through this, is just to continue to set aside, even if it's 30 minutes, even if it's just a chapter a day, don't lose sight of learning and growing, or you'll come to the starting line of the post-COVID season exactly in the same place as you were at the beginning. So maybe that's reflecting for you. Maybe it's journaling and taking notes of what you're learning in this season so that you can apply it to your next season. That's another thing I want you to fill up on during this season. Now, the last thing I want you to fill up on, and this is one that I think is so important, especially for all of us who live in such a great country like the US. And that is to fill up on gratitude over comparison. That's right. I know it sounds super churchy, it sounds super weird, but I promise it applies to all of us. Filling up on comparison will fuel you for a little bit. But here's the analogy I want to give you, and I know you guys will understand this because you're water treatment professionals. Filling up on comparison to fuel you and to look at your competition and have that be what inspires you to work harder and grow more, that's the same thing as filling up on untreated water. It may quench your thirst for a little bit, but a couple hours later, you're going to get sick. And if you show up to the starting line of a race like the post-COVID season, you're not only going to not be able to finish that race, you're going to end up worse off than you were before you started that race. So instead of filling up on the untreated water of comparison. I want you to fill up with gratitude. And on a daily basis, look at the things in your life that you're grateful for. No matter what you've lost, no matter how hard this season has been for you, there have been things that have gone right, or there are things in your life that are still on the upswing. And so I want you to focus on those things. There's actually been research done on this idea, and doctors have said time and time again that the people that do this gratitude exercise, maybe picking 3 things a day at the start of your day that you're grateful for, people that do this have happier lives. And as a pastor, doesn't even matter whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, I want you to have a happier, more fulfilled life, a life of peace and joy. And so if you can do that, if you can fill up daily with gratitude, that is going to help you show up to the starting line of the post-COVID season, hydrated, ready, not burn out, not exhausted, ready to take on what comes next. So those are the 3 things. I know they sound simple, but I know that they will help you stay hydrated. Now, you can come to me and you can say, Alston, what about work? You didn't say anything about filling up on work. Well, that's because I think that's where you're already putting a lot of your time. And yes, working is like running. It is part of training for the marathon. However, if you only run to train for your marathon and you don't hydrate along the way, you may be ready to go as a runner, but you're not going to be ready. Your body's not going to be ready for what that race is going to take. So yes, work is a piece of it, but I know that you as high capacity leaders have no problem prioritizing the work that needs to be done. I think we actually need to pull back the reins a little bit and to hydrate on these 3 things that I said that are the most important to make sure we can sustain this next season that's coming at us. So from my heart to yours, I want you to think about these 3 things. Do I need to fill up on my relationships and my quality time? Do I need to be filling up on positive mental nutrition? Have I pushed that to the wayside in this season? And do I need to be filling up on gratitude over comparison? One of those 3 things is going to ring true with you today. And I want you to set aside some time. I want you to even write it down right now to prioritize filling up on that in the weeks or maybe even months to come. We don't know. But I do know that this season will end. And I do know that the next one is going to be better. And you have an opportunity, just like I said at the beginning. Those that respond to this season best will have a shot at becoming the best after this season's over. And that's what I want for you. So I'm so grateful you came to this conference. I'm so grateful you prioritized this time today. And I really do hope and wish you the best in the race to come.
Alston, thank you so much for that. And ladies and gentlemen, members of AWT, I hope you found a handful of things that you could take back to your companies, to your personal life during the webinar that we just presented. I'm pretty sure you can share some of those items with people in your company. You can act on them almost immediately. And you're probably frantically taking notes on some of the books that we've mentioned, some of the resources that we mentioned. Well, I'm here to say you don't have to do that. We have a PDF that you can download that has all of those resources on them. We are going to send that to AWT. At this point in time, I don't know what that looks like. So we're also going to have a link at our exhibit booth for Scaling Up H2O, where there'll be a link for this webinar, and there'll also be that PDF page as well. So all the resources are there. You don't need to worry about writing them down. Again, hope you learned something. And Jill, I want to thank you for helping all the people that I think learned something today that feel maybe a little bit better about this crazy thing called the pandemic and the ever-changing world that we live in.
Thank you, Trace. If anyone has any questions for Trace and I, on Wednesday, September 30th from 3 to 3:30, we'll be doing a live Q&A, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have or any questions that you have from this webinar. You can also feel free to reach out personally to Trace or I. We'd be happy to help. Thank you very much, and thank you, Trace.